Welcome back to the BRoto Fantasy Football Podcast presented by BrotoFantasy.com. I'm your host, Tim Petrop, with my brothers, the only two twins that give you double that fantasy goodness, Michael and Jason Petrop.
Now up on the Real Recognized Real hotline is the realest of the real. Some would say he is the father of this podcast from afar. Him and the fantasy footballers are the reason why us three brothers have decided to make this podcast, decided to turn our dream into a reality of the fantasy footballers. Mr. Jason Moore, thank you so much for giving us your time, and it's an honor to talk to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here. I love hearing the stories of, the ideas and the passions that are sparked from what we've done. It's always it's a blessing.
And if you guys didn't know, the fantasy footballers are constantly in Fantasy Pros top 10 rankings. They have multiple awards, including the iHeartRadio Award for Best Sports Podcast over ESPN and all of them, and completely independent 100%. I always talk to the guys about you guys because when we started this, I'm like, there's this podcast called The Fantasy Footballers. You should check it out. I think that we could, have our own fresh spin on fantasy and make it work the way that they make it work. And I always tell them if I ever got to have an extended conversation with one of you guys, the thing that I would ask you first, the first thing would be, who thought of the name The Fantasy Footballers? Because it is absolute genius.
Yeah. So, well, here we are with an extended conversation, and yes. you kept true to your word. So back in the day when this was first starting out, Andy and Mike started the podcast. They had a different podcast that was about our fantasy football league. So it was just made for the other 12 people in the league. That was, and then, they were already recording and doing all that and dominating the league. And so they're like, let's do this forward facing. That's when they decided to make the Fantasy Footballers. I didn't come on for a couple more weeks. I mean, it was like, I think they had 40 listeners before I was there. So I was there in the beginning, but they named the show. And truth be told, once it became, okay, we're going to do this outwardly and have a show for the people, it ran like a business. So the names that were gone through, I don't remember others now, but it really came down to SEO, to search engine optimization. And when your name is the Fantasy Footballers and you search for fantasy football, bonus. So that's, that's where that was probably 80% of the name.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way I found you guys. You guys definitely hit that sweet spot where the podcasting was just blowing up. I searched fantasy football on podcasting, and you guys popped up. You were the first ones. And you have that magical potion where you have that name, your search engine optimization, and then you guys are real with the fantasy football rankings. And, I mean, you have to be literally under a rock to not have heard about you guys in the fantasy community at this point. And on top of that, you make the show so fun to listen to, and with the nicknames and the jokes and all that stuff. When was it that you guys first realized that this is something that could be more than just kind of an on the side thing, and it could be a real business?
Before the show started. It was actually when the idea came up for Andy and Mike to do that, and I'd been listening to the internal one. I knew what they could do on air, and I remember coming up to they worked for me at our former company, BRoto Game Studios, and so we would be together every day talking fantasy football. And I remember going to Andy in the kitchen once and just telling him, like, this is going to be huge. And he was like, oh man, you think that it could be? And I was like, no, I don't think it could be. I think this will be huge. So I was a believer before it really launched. Before I was a part, I said that before I was a part of the Fantasy Footballers.
That's awesome, man. When did you guys decide to just leave, make this your full time? How did you guys come to that decision to just decide we're going? I know you were a huge believer, but even then, I'm sure you guys started, and this wasn't like your main source of income. When did you guys decide to just go full head of steam? Like, this is what we are pursuing for our careers?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're all fathers of three with, house payments and real life happening. You can't just be like, well, I'm going to do something else. I don't make money yet full time. This is my new job. But at the same time, we were kind of pushed into it a little bit. I had, as I said, we ran a different company that was very successful. We had, 26 employees and, a really nice studio, and had a lot of good times. I left that company a couple years before the start of this podcast, and during that time, we were Facebook gaming, and that changed a lot, and the company ended up going under. So when we were launching this podcast was about the same time that former company, which was still paying my bills, went under. So we kind of found ourselves jobless, moneyless, and we needed to create a new career, which we had done a couple times in the past. Andy and I went and got our real estate license. That was our job. We were going to become realtors, and I think we would have crushed it. I think we would have been great realtors. But while we were in real estate school, we had already started the podcast, so it was kind of a race between those two. But it was like a race between John Ross and LeGarrette Blount, and it was not a fair race. And right off the bat, it was like, oh, we're gonna do this one. So we never really used our real estate licenses.
And now, before we get into football, I need to ask you one more question. This new Jason Eats segment. When did you realize that you're going to be eating cereal with water and SpaghettiOs with disgusting stuff in it?
So we have our second podcast, the Spitballers podcast, if you've ever heard of that. And it's just an entertainment podcast, just comedy. No football. It allows us to derail and just be there for entertaining the masses. And on that show, we talk about a lot of stupid questions, would you rather questions. We do drafts of just things, favorite movies or whatever. The whole thing came up where, in the quarantine time, would you do cereal with water? And Mike threw me under the bus and said, well, now we're going to need a video. So that's where it started. And I've got a couple more of those planned out.
Great. Definitely looking forward to that, man. But all right. So, I mean, if you don't know who Jason Moore is, obviously you've been living under a rock in the fantasy community. If you haven't checked it out, check out the Fantasy Footballers podcast. Check out the Spitballers podcast. The reason why everyone knows about you is because of your fantasy football take. So the first thing I want to get into is the NFL draft that just passed. What we have nicknamed this past NFL draft was the workhorse apocalypse, where you saw so many high draft picks get picked to places where there already was an established running back, like Marlon Mack or Aaron Jones. So the question for you is, when you're looking at these guys and you're evaluating, okay, there's an established running back, but there's another running back coming in with a second round draft value on him, how are you approaching that in upcoming drafts?
Yeah, I totally understand that, because the places of all of the top running backs in this class, there's another guy there, or it's not a clear-cut opportunity. But I don't see this as the death of the workhorse back. Christian McCaffrey wasn't a workhorse back his rookie year. Lev Bell wasn't. There's plenty of situations where a guy takes a little bit of time, and he's kind of in a situation with another presumptive back there. Derrick Henry took several years before he became I think you would call him the workhorse. So with Jonathan Taylor, with J.K. Dobbins, with these guys, I think they're in situations where, this year they're going to be in a timeshare. They're not going to be a year one fantasy star, and yet they are going to be a fantasy star. And I think they're going to be, if not a workhorse, I don't know if you'd call, prime Devonta Freeman a workhorse. There was always Tevin Coleman there, but he was the running back one. Right. So I think we're all fine with that for fantasy. I think the outlook for most of these guys, be it Cam Akers, Dobbins, Taylor, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think they're all going to be excellent fantasy options.
What about the guys that they are coming to back up, be the Tevin Coleman to their Devonta Freeman's. Are you worried about them?
Oh yeah, they're pretty much dead to me across the board. I don't want to get my hands on the piece that is on the way down and that is in the process of being replaced. The only exception there might be Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram is, I think he will run ahead of Dobbins, whereas I don't think Mac will run ahead of Jonathan Taylor, but like for the whole year. So I think I would be okay with Mark Ingram, and that's a team where they're going to run the ball so much that it's okay. Gus Edwards had, almost 150 carries last year, and that didn't hurt Mark Ingram.
Yeah. When it comes to the running back landing spots, though, there's obviously one clear-cut winner who not only got the best landing spot, but is number one in draft capital, and that's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Since the draft, I've already seen him going in, like, the second round of drafts. When is too early for you for Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Are you jumping right in, or are you kind of waiting it out to see what's going on there first?
It's going to depend on your league. If you're a keeper league or a dynasty league, obviously very different. But let's talk keepers. Because dynasty, you're a rookie draft, totally separate. Obviously he's probably the first pick. If he's not, then he's the second. But in a startup draft that wouldn't be keepers, I think that you're going to have a slower onboarding process. But I would probably expect him to be taken by me near this, the back of the second. And if there is a keeper situation there, if you're keeping 3 or 4 guys, I think Edwards-Helaire is going to have a really good opportunity. I mean, when you pair with a coach that seems like he could just keep doing it forever, has done it forever, a young best quarterback in the league, the offense that's outstanding, a history of whether it's Westbrook or Shady or Kareem Hunt or Jamal Charles. I mean, the running back for Andy Reid is going to be great. So yeah, I'm all in on trying to get him for the long term. And this was a guy that I wasn't crazy about pre-draft. I was lower than most people on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was, I think he was overhyped by the LSU machine. Mm-hmm. But now he goes to the Chiefs machine. So it's like, okay, I'm in. That's great. It's like, oh, you won't always have Joe Burrow, opening up holes. Oh, wait, you got Pat Mahomes. You're good.
No, I mean, I love to hear you say that because we do that all the time. When people let their pre-draft biases enter their post-draft takes, that's just a recipe for disaster. When it comes to these running backs, I'll just flip this on its head now, rather than the first guy off the board. Who's someone that you want to try to grab in the backgrounds, like Anthony McFarland or Zach Moss or
something? Yeah, I mean, if it's someone in the later rounds, it would probably be Joshua Kelly. I think Joshua Kelly is a quality back. He's not a world beater, but I think when you're looking at the back of drafts, I'm looking far less at the talent of the running back and more at the opportunity, because running back is obviously that combination of talent versus opportunity. Opportunity is more important than talent at running back in the NFL for fantasy. If he gets the ball a lot, he's going to be good for fantasy. You could be the most talented back in the world, and if you don't get the ball, it's not going to help you. And this is a role where you've got Melvin Gordon leaving. The presumed one is Austin Eckler, who is not capable of being a true workhorse guy. They split him out. They use him as a gadget player as well. And, because he's a little bit smaller, 200 pounds or so. And so is the other guy there, Justin Jackson. So I think Joshua Kelly has an opportunity to, a path to a large opportunity for volume. So that'd be the guy I'm taking the shot at.
One of the things that I learned from you listening to your podcast was rookie wide receivers stay away until week 5, 6-ish, and then look for them on your waiver wire, or else you'll just be burning a spot, because usually rookie wide receivers don't make that kind of noise. Then again, we are in a situation now where rookie wide receivers are everywhere. I think 13 guys went in the first round, including 3 guys who are borderline superstars, as people are putting them. Is there any of the wide receivers that went in the first round, or even after the first round this year, that you are going to kind of break your own mold on and draft and keep on your squad in a redraft?
Yeah, I think there will be this year. I'll be a little bit more bullish. You know, generally speaking, you're 100% right. I avoid rookie wide receivers. It's kind of like as far as in the draft. In the draft, I just let other people draft them. They get off to a slow start, and you know, look at AJ Brown. It was unbelievable last year. Not in the beginning. You know, it took some time. You know, DJ Moore the year before, it's like, oh, he was really good, but not in the beginning. So that I think that is usually what's going to happen. And you could argue that it will be slower this year without a true offseason program for these rookies to get caught up to speed. Jerry Jeudy would be one that I would take an exception on, because I think he's slotted immediately as a starter, and he could be one of those guys with 100 targets rookie year. So I would take a shot on him. And I want to be a little bit more bullish, because this is a draft class that has been talked about for years. The last time we had one of these was 2014. And in that draft class, there were several, I think 4 rookies who were wide receiver ones that year, if I'm not mistaken. That was Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, Kelvin Benjamin, and who am I forgetting?
Okay.
And someone else.
I'm blanking on the 4th too.
I have to look that up.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up.
I could just be wrong. That's also an option here. But yeah, so this year I think the talent dictates that I'll take a couple shots. Sammy Watkins.
There you go.
You know, but in general, you're right. I avoid rookie wide receivers in the draft. Look for them in trades or waivers. You know, week 4 or 5.
Be careful, you forgot the Lizard King, so you might get a spell cast on you.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's touch on keeper leagues again, because you brought that up earlier. You see guys like CeeDee Lamb, right, who was supposed to be he was consensus top 2 in most rankings of the wide receivers coming out with Jerry Jeudy, and now he lands in Dallas with Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, Zeke. And then you get guys like Jalen Reagor, who isn't as talented as CeeDee Lamb is per se, but guess what? He's on the Eagles, where he could automatically possibly slot into the wide receiver 1 if he's able to grow early. And then you got guys like Justin Jefferson in Minnesota, who looks like he might be able to make an impact right away. How's that affecting your outlook on these guys in keeper leagues?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those guys, and you can add in Ruggs, landed in a situation where if they're talented enough, they can win out. There are enough targets. Even when you look at CeeDee Lamb for the Cowboys, you think, oh no, this is the worst situation. You've got Gallup, who was really emerging as a 1B, if not just a great 2, and Amari Cooper, $100 million man. But they had the 3rd most vacated targets this last year. They lost Cobb, they lost Witten, and now you've got a head coach who ran a lot of 3 wide receiver, 4 wide receiver sets. Had, you know, those 3 wide receivers all performed for fantasy back in the day when it was Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb and James Jones. So I think all of these wide receivers are in good spots. I was a big fan of Jalen Reagor in my evaluation. He was my 3rd wide receiver behind the Jeudy Lamb beasts, and he finds himself into a good situation. So yeah, you know, I brought up Jeudy, but I think you just named, outside of Ruggs, I won't take a shot on Ruggs, but outside of that, I would say Jeudy, Lamb, Reagor, and Jefferson are guys that in a keeper league or in a redraft league, I'll be a little bit more bullish than I usually am.
To switch the tone to just general drafting. So we're all pretty split here. I'm more of so I like to call my draft strategy seesaw running backs. So I'm taking some studs in the 1st and 2nd rounds, and then I'm going to wait and then take more in the 9th or 10th rounds. Michael over here is straight up 0 running back, heavy wide receiver, and Tim's a little bit of a mix.
I just take as many running backs as possible as early as possible.
All right, there you go. What's your main drafting strategy?
Well, first, before you can really quantify that, is you've got to know what the league settings are, right? Because if I'm in a league where it's 3 wide receiver, 2 flex, full PPR, then 0 RB is a worthy strategy and makes a lot of sense. If you're in a half PPR league where it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, I'm going to be so much more on the running back early side. But so that would be the first thing to look at is what is the roster construction, and then assuming it's a normal league, I am going to very much be running back heavier in the beginning, but never, ever, ever set myself. I mean, we say it all the time on our podcast. You got to stay water. I don't go in saying my first 2 picks are going to be running back. I don't give a crap. You don't always know who's going to go and take that first round quarterback or go crazy high on Travis Kelce and just push more talent down. And I'm not going to take, an inferior running back to a star wide receiver just because he's a running back.
Fair enough.
Switching over to the quarterback position, one thing that the NFL outside of the fantasy world consensus has been is that the Jordan Love pick by the Green Bay Packers didn't make much sense. And I mean, when you're talking about a redraft, you're not going to be drafting Jordan Love this year. You're probably not going to be drafting Jordan Love at all if you're in any draft. But one thing that you've mentioned and that we've mentioned on the podcast is that Aaron Rodgers has kind of been not only not Aaron Rodgers, but very kind of playing it safe kind of guy. Now, I contend that Jordan Love being behind him is going to push Aaron Rodgers to get back to the type of, I don't want to say gunslinger because he never was a gunslinger, but kind of more of a risk taker, deep thrower that he was in his past years. What's your outlook on Aaron Rodgers this year, and how does the drafting of Jordan Love affect that?
Yeah, my outlook on Aaron Rodgers is not great. I think that you look at last season and the success that they had winning games, running the ball, rushing touchdowns. They go and spend a second-round pick on A.J. Dillon, and they don't give much needed help to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, the wide receiving core is absolute garbage. You've got Devontae Adams and then pretty much nothing. Maybe Devin Funchess has a resurgence. You've got the Lazard King there as well. But I mean, these are guys that shouldn't even be talked about as a 2. Jay Sternberger, that this is a year 2 not super high draft capital tight end that I like, but I only like because he's in this crazy situation where Rodgers doesn't have any weapons. And if you look at him for fantasy last year, Rodgers was #bad. Like he had 3 really great games, and outside of that, he was not usually a top 12 quarterback on a weekly basis. If you started him all last year, there, odds are you did not make the playoffs. And so coming into this following season, do I think he's going to be extra motivated by Jordan Love? Absolutely. Do I think that gives him more options to throw the ball to? No.
Yeah, I thought that draft was just one of the most ridiculous drafts I've ever seen. A.J. Dillon in the second round. Like, that just blew my mind when you already have Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams there. And to not grab a wide receiver later either, guys like Gandy Golden even in the 4th round, went someone like that. Is there someone you think that could have gone in the 4th to 7th round area that could maybe not an impact right away, but could be an impact down the road?
At wide receiver for the Packers, is that what you're saying?
In general.
Just in general, yeah, I guess I worded that pretty bad, but in general, because I'm saying they could have probably gotten someone late to help them, but do you see anyone who went somewhere else late in the draft that could be a help down the road? Like someone you're not aiming for, particularly in redraft leagues, but maybe in a dynasty league, you draft in like the 15th, 16th round, and then in 2-3 years, there's like a big return.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough with those guys, right? Because there's 2 different rules of thumb. You say, okay, going back to where a team was, was there someone on the board that you would have taken at that spot and given them relevance? Well, sure. But as far as how the NFL draft goes, once the players are drafted, the order of which they were drafted actually really makes a big difference. What day they were drafted. You have this. I truly believe that if the same player, who was drafted by the same team in the same situation, were to have gone from a day 3 pick to a day 2 pick, that same player's career is completely different. They come into camp with a different outlook. Game plans are built, around that. So I don't look for late round NFL draft picks to be sensational options later. I look at the opposite. I look at guys that were drafted with high capital that weren't pre-draft talked about. Van Jefferson is a good example, right? Van Jefferson, a lot of people that are casual fans, when he's drafted, go, who's Van Jefferson? Denzel Mims is still on the board. Antonio Gibson and Lynn Bowden and Brian Edwards and all these guys, Gandy Golden and Peoples-Jones, all these guys that were talked about higher, they were still on the board. Well, they were still on the board, and McVay decided to spend a second-round pick on Van Jefferson. So I look more to find later, because Van Jefferson will be a late draft pick. Yeah. I've done 2 Dynasty League rookie drafts where he's a third-round pick. This is a guy, say whatever you want, but he was just drafted in the second round by high-power offense that lost Brandon Cooks. You might not have loved him before the draft. It don't matter what you like or love. It matters what McVay likes. So yeah, I tend to really weigh the draft capital versus trying to find gyms super late.
Yeah, we're on board with you with that strategy. The one kind of caveat is at the tight end position. We've seen Travis Kelce, George Kittle, 3rd and 4th round picks. It's because rookies take time to develop, so they're not going to get tight ends take time to develop, so they're not going to get the highest draft capital. I was shouting at the rooftop not to waste your fab on T.J. Hawkinson at the end of week 1 last year. Is there a rookie in this draft class where the tight ends weren't really spoken much about that you're looking at for a year or 2 down the road?
Not really. This was I feel like personally it was a weaker tight end class. Certainly that doesn't mean that nobody will hit, but you're talking about, I'm not going to take a shot. Like I've gone through a couple rookie drafts. I haven't drafted a tight end because they take so long to develop. I don't want to clog my roster, and especially when you're talking about a guy that is a lower draft capital, because there weren't first round guys. They're not going to get the opportunity to break out for a couple years. And that's not to say they won't break out, but I don't want to wait. I'm not playing for 3 years from now. I'm playing for the next 3 years. So I tend to be someone that does not care about getting the tight end that's going to pop 4 years from now. I'll trade for veteran tight ends that people don't really want. Like last year, you could have got Jared Cook pretty easily. He's older, and give me Jared Cook last year over Noah Fant last year, even in a dynasty, because it's like, I want to win championships. Not hypothetical, theoretical championships down in the future when my team will really develop to be perfect. I'm always trading and making moves to have the best active roster.
So we've kept it pretty positive, but let's get a little negative, because the key to fantasy football, in my opinion, is not only making the correct pickups, and you say this a lot, is your league is not won in the draft. Your league is won with pickups during the year, but in order to pick someone up, you have to drop somebody else. And some of the hardest decisions to make in fantasy is when to drop a player. So is there a rule of thumb? I know you guys have the what is it called? The NBA Jam rule for someone who's actually doing well. Yeah, for heating up. Do you have a rule of thumb for when it's time to just cut a guy loose and cut your losses?
I don't think I have any general on paper rule. I would say this, that usually when there are older running backs, I am quicker to release them. If you're talking in a dynasty league, people that don't have jobs that are older, I'm not going to hang around forever, because I don't believe, I'm pessimistic in their outlook. I had an opportunity to buy Devonta Freeman a little bit cheaper. I just kind of didn't do it. I dropped Dion Lewis. When you're older as a running back, the league chews you up and spits you out. So, if you're talking about a dynasty league making drops, which maybe that's just where my brain is, because I've been faced with those decisions this week of like dropping existing veteran players. But if you're talking in a redraft league, when do you drop a guy, in week 3, in week 4 that you drafted? That's a case by case basis. And I think that's why at the draft, what you want to do in your back picks is take guys that you are going to find out whether they are right or wrong, whether the talking heads of the world of fantasy football are right or wrong in week 1. You look, this guy, we don't know who's going to get the first run. It could be this guy. People expect it to be that guy. Those are the type of draft picks I take so that at week 1, the cut is easy. I don't have to wait 3 or 4 weeks. I don't want to draft a guy. This is why I don't usually draft rookie wide receivers, right? I want to draft a guy who you're going to find out the answer super early in the season, not a guy where it's like, I'm going to hold him and wait until he gets his chance. I hate doing that.
That was a gem. That was a gem, everyone. Just got knowledge dropped on you.
I know it's very early on in the season, but is there someone already that you're eyeing this year that just seems like he is going to be a tremendous value that you see yourself getting a lot of?
I haven't. So right now that the NFL draft is over, we're going through all of our rankings. We stat out every single player on every single team, go deep, and it's a deep dive. It's a torturous affair, but that usually lets me see who I'm really going after, because it takes out so much of the, we just did our early season rankings, and those on the podcast are thoughts. Those are feelings. Those are opinions. Do I like a guy? Do I expect good things? We're just making a ranking list. We're looking at a list of player names, and we're moving a guy ahead or behind other names. I like this guy more. But then when you stat everybody out and you see things that make sense, this team isn't going to have 1,000 rushing attempts between this running back core. You look at historical averages and market shares and all that. Then all of a sudden you look at your rankings and you just let the chips fall where the stats lie. And it says, wow, apparently I think this guy has a huge opportunity this year. I didn't think that I would take him over all these players. So I don't really have my opinion formed yet as to a specific player I'm targeting. But if we had done this podcast in about 2 weeks, when I'm done with that, I'll have some names for you.
And when you're ranking, how do you weigh the difference between opportunity and efficiency? Because we are a podcast that's all about efficiency. We have a statistic known as true values that measures the worth of targets to tell you how many fantasy points each target is worth. And Ryan Tannehill, surprisingly or not, was number 1 last season. So every throw from his hand resulted in the most fantasy points of any quarterback in the league. Now, A.J. Brown exploded with that, even though he didn't see as many targets as other guys. So how do you balance efficiency and opportunity?
I'm an opportunity guy. I'm always going to take the opportunity over efficiency. I'd rather have the Zeke than the Kamara, for example, because I think it's more predictable and it's stickier. Obviously you want both, right? You want a guy who's got a lot of volume and he's super efficient with it. But when you're looking at fantasy points and efficiency on that side, a lot of times those things are tied to touchdowns, right? Because that's where the juice comes for total fantasy points. And on that side, I certainly wouldn't get too caught up on the efficiency, because touchdowns aren't sticky. Guys that get 13, 14 touchdowns in a season can turn around and get 6 the next year. You look at Julio Jones' early career, where it was like, oh, he can't score touchdowns. Oh, he's double digit. Oh, he can't score touchdowns. Those don't come, even though he was still consistent with his volume year in and year out. So generally speaking, I care when I'm statting guys out about their carries. Like, I do a lot of research when I'm statting these teams out on what I expect their carries to be, and their targets to be, and their pass attempts for each position. Those are the numbers I try to be the most accurate on. I think everything else flows out of that.
So you mentioned that accuracy on being able to predict how many times a guy's going to touch a ball, how many guys are going to throw a ball. Usually when you're talking about offenses, not that many quarterbacks change team year from year, at least starting quarterbacks. And then all of a sudden this year we had this kind of huge turnover with guys that we're used to seeing in one spot and not in another. For example, Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers, guys like this who we've grown accustomed to, okay, James White is going to have some fantasy value because Tom Brady likes throwing the guys out of the backfield. And that the tight end for the Chargers is going to have some value because Phillip Rivers historically throws to tight ends. How do you evaluate guys like that now in a completely new system, in a completely new city, on the other end of their career where they're a little older? How do you try and reconcile that between the offensive system that they're going to and the player themselves, and their tendencies?
Well, you don't throw anything out. And you don't make a general rule that is going to be across every player and every, you take a look at the specifics, right? Bruce Arians' system doesn't really throw to the tight end. Tom Brady has utilized tight ends, specifically Gronk. So one of those two things is presumably going to be wrong. But when you're statting these guys out, you want to take a top-down approach. What I do in my process, because I go team by team, is ironically, so like Phillip Rivers would have been a great example of if he was on the Chargers, I would stat out Phillip Rivers first because you have so much data as to what he does, about how many yards, about how many touchdowns, about how many picks, about how many, his averages are pretty locked in. And then I will take those stats that he is going to develop and I will split them up amongst the team. Well, when there's much more confusion in there, say Josh Allen last year, how am I going to stat him out? Is he going to take a jump up? Is he not? I don't have this kind of historical data. I do it the exact opposite approach. I stat out the weapons and the players and what I believe they will get, and I let that dictate where Josh Allen falls. So this year, when it comes to Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers and trying to figure out how they lie, I'm probably going to take that reverse approach for them for the first time in several years and stat out their team before them and see what I expect their team to provide them. But you also have to use logic, right? Like there's a reason Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers throw to the running back. It's because they don't want to get hit. At their age, they're not going to run. They're, the pocket breaks down. They're dumping the ball off, whether it's to the ground or to a human, over and over. So, you have to keep that in mind with tendencies. It's not just they Phillip Rivers throws to the tight end because he likes the tight end. It's why. And so you want to, it's hard to keep everything in your mind while you're statting guys out, but it's also fun. It's a fun challenge.
We're just going to end it there because you're hitting us with some incredible insight. Honestly, some great work. Thank you so much, Jason.
I could ask you questions all day, man.
Yeah. We know you got other things to do, but thank you so much again. Honestly, you're an inspiration to all of us, and we've been following your work for years, and it's just great to have you on the podcast with us.
I appreciate the time. Best of luck to you guys. Hope your podcast grows and everything works out well for you guys.
Thank you. Why don't you plug yourself before you go?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at JasonFFL. The Fantasy Footballers, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can subscribe to us there. The Spitballers podcast, if you haven't been listening to that, it's a family-friendly comedy, which is like non-existent in the world. Good for quarantine time, but yeah, you can pretty much find us wherever on any and all platforms, including now soon on TikTok, apparently.
Oh man. Uh-oh. I'm throwing out a banana and mayo suggestion for Jason Eats.
Oh, a banana and mayo. Sounds special. Sounds special. My next one, I'll give you insight. My next Jason Eats will be a sandwich that is, I believe, raisin bread, bologna, cheese, mustard, peanut butter, jelly, and
Yikes.
I think I'm missing an ingredient.
You got the salty sweet combo going on though.
That kind of sounds good.
The bologna is what does it.
Yeah. So we'll see. Thanks for having me on, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks.